All right, hello, new students. This is Cam Addis again, your history instructor from Austin Community College. I want to talk to you briefly today about my teaching philosophy. I don't have time to get into everything, but I want to talk about things especially that connect to the course. You can look at some more formal explanations up here under the Texas Core Curriculum, which you can find under Guides in History Hub, and that will explain how the course is mapped to some of the core objectives from the Higher Education Board. But most of you will probably be looking just over here at the homepage. And the homepage, it talks a little bit about the importance of perspective, recognition, context. One of our former presidents, Harry Truman, once said that there's absolutely nothing new in the world except for what you don't know about history. Well, I don't know if that's quite true, but I think there's enough truth to that it's something we ought to pay attention to. You're going to be learning about a lot of things in the course that you're never going to see repeated again exactly the way they happened in your future, but you're going to see patterns there. And recognizing those patterns, I think, will help you understand what's going on around you a little bit better. I always tell people, if you really want to understand things, you want to look at the context. You want to go both back and out to get perspective. When I say back and out, when I say back, I mean back in history and see how people have dealt with challenges like that in the past, but also out in terms of a wider area or geographically, or looking globally at how other cultures have dealt with similar challenges as well. So there are many different things I talk about here on the front of the History Hub homepage, but one of them is that trying to figure out what's going on around you just based on what you see in the present. It's very similar to me to if you only saw one scene in a movie and then somebody asked you, what's the plot of this movie? And you had no idea not only what's going to happen in the future, none of us do, but also no background at all as to what's happened earlier in the movie. Be very difficult to arrive at an intelligent opinion as to what this movie is about. For instance, if all you saw from rear window was this still, or even a little bit more, and you saw Jimmy Stewart there, you wouldn't know why he's in his pajamas, or definitely not what he's looking at through this camera. Is he just taking pictures of a nice scene outside? Is he using the telephoto lens to spy on his neighbors? What exactly is he doing? If he's doing that, why is he doing that? You really would be pretty clueless. Same thing with this still from the Alamo 2004. You see, well, I can tell that Dennis Quaid was in this movie and he's playing Sam Houston. But even if you saw the entire scene, what would you really know about the roots of the Texas Revolution, let alone the impact later? There's no context at all to explain anything. So we're going to try to look, we can't see the future in this class, but we're going to do our best to figure out the ways that the past can help us explain the present. So this happens to be me, by the way, as an extra in the Alamo. And one of the longer working days, I have to say, I arrived there at 3 a.m. Great breakfast, by the way. But between 4 a.m. and noon, we all got into costume. And then from noon until midnight, we shot this scene that lasted a total of about 3 minutes. So anyway, fun work. If you're looking for a little extra money and living in Austin, they make a lot of movies, a lot of commercials, things like that. So you might want to consider being an extra. On a slightly more serious note, I want to look at some educational philosophy that helps inform what I do. This is Bloom's pyramid. If you've ever heard of anything connecting to pedagogy, it's probably Bloom's pyramid or Bloom's taxonomy. There's a lot of talk about using sort of factual knowledge and building on that for higher orders of thinking. I do agree with Bloom's pyramid in terms of that basic concept, even though I would quibble with the specific details and how these are ranked. I wouldn't put necessarily evaluation or analysis or application or creation in any particular order or anything like that. I think things like that in general, critical thinking, would belong a little bit more at the top of the pyramid. But you could say that this, applies roughly to what we're doing in this class with the textbook chapters, and the 5 objective exams that we're taking on those apply a little bit more here to the purple area, especially, even though the learning objectives are going to use behavioral terms or action verbs at the beginning. And rather than just asking you a question, they're going to say, evaluate this, analyze this, etc. We don't deal a lot with the very bottom rung here, the remembering. Some of that's built into the course because you have to remember what you've learned about higher orders of thinking. But I will never ask you on an exam, for instance, what year did something happen, or something that's just purely rote memorization about a fact like that. We're going to be interpreting and understanding facts, and then, testing our knowledge of that. And then we have the written components of the course are really hanging out here more in the higher levels of thinking. We got the interpretive essay with the online or the ONL format, where you're going to be comparing and contrasting on a topic of your choice, how another scholar has dealt with a topic in comparison with our textbook, and how well this other outside author deals with the evidence and comes to a different interpretation. Perhaps they are looking at it from a fresh angle because they're a different person, or maybe they have fresh material. Maybe there have been declassified documents, but we're constantly reinterpreting history. It's an ongoing argument. You may have heard the word revisionism used in kind of a negative way, like somebody is accused of being a revisionist. We're constantly revising. Whatever it is you think about history, that's probably a revised interpretation based on what someone else said before that. The argumentative essay for the face-to-face courses, or for the lecture courses, we're going to go into a little bit more detail there in the classroom, but suffice to say that also involves a lot of analysis and evaluation. And then everyone in all the formats is going to be doing some form of social media analysis. This is, for better or worse, really how most Americans are learning about and interpreting history now, is through social media, which, as you can imagine, can be a little bit misleading, or even at the very best, very fragmentary, in terms of you're just getting little snippets and bits of history from posts and memes, and the person's trying to make some point about it. And so we're going to really kind of analyze some examples of that, unpack them, deconstruct them a little bit, figure out what point this person's trying to make, and then look a little bit deeper at that topic and ask ourselves how that could potentially be an oversimplification. So really, all of you are going to be working on that assignment. And the idea of that is to really strengthen your digital literacy. Now, digital literacy is a term that sometimes people will use to just describe, can the person use a computer or not, which is an important skill. But here we're defining it a little bit more broadly to mean, how well are you filtering information? How well are you evaluating what you're seeing and taking stock in it? So I'm going to be encouraging some methods that I've developed, which are imperfect, but ones that you can use purely online when you're on your own, in terms of lateral cross-checking and things like that. Looking at what other sources have to say about the topic, or what other sources have to say about that source, but also guiding you through how to use the ACC library, because they have great access to JSTOR and EBSCO, and more scholarship at your fingertips than ever before, even though there's also more unreliable information that's out there than ever before. So really what I'm trying to do is encourage you to do your own research in an intelligent way. I realize that phrase DYOR is fraught with associations. You may have seen people, wearing t-shirts or baseball hats that say do your own research on it, who are the ones going down the most crackpot rabbit holes. And so, it depends on who the you is with the do your own research, and how well that person has developed those skills of evaluation and filtering. Because really, our society, if you have not noticed, is in a real state of confusion right now, where not only do we disagree on things, but we really don't even have an agreed upon sense of reality anymore because of how the internet has impacted us, and because of the fragmentation of media, et cetera. So it's a very important skill, I think, as we look to strengthen and embolden our republic, is to get a little bit better at that. Because these people over here, they need to learn how to analyze, how to evaluate. So we're going to be doing some exercises along those lines. Another thing that Bloom's pyramid, I think, connects to decently is the study of history. The fancier word of which is historiography, but historiography, like learning in general, is kind of based on a foundation. And there is a bedrock of factual knowledge that's out there that's more or less agreed upon. We disagree a little bit on that also, but that's at least theoretically possible for us to agree on the facts. And the way we look at these facts in history, when we talk about evidence in history, we use the word primary sources. But whenever you hear me use the word primary sources, I don't mean what's your main source. I mean, what is the evidence? And when I say evidence, I mean something that was manufactured in the time period under discussion. So we have these facts as a bedrock, but then we also interpret history. And once we go into interpreting history, then there is without fail going to be a certain amount of bias and subjectivity there. Now, this is another important thing for you to distinguish between, is the concept of bias, which is not a bad thing as long as you know what you're reading, and fake news or misinformation. There's misinformation, which is wrong, and then there's disinformation, which is deliberately wrong. But both of those are very different than, for instance, bias. You can have a left-leaning magazine like The Nation, for instance, is biased, or a right-leaning magazine like National Review is biased, but there's nothing fake about them. Bias, in fact, is really how, or interpretation is really how you move toward creating a thesis when you write a paper. So once you get up into this territory, no two historians are alike. One of the things I pointed out when I was showing you the Rear to Fogger over in the History Hub was a bunch of different fallacies. One of those is selection bias. Selection bias is not really a fallacy. It's just a bias that's inescapable, because no matter what material we present, we have to decide which material to present. So for instance, if I was going to tell you everything that ever happened in American history, well, no one person could even remotely begin to do that. But even if I could do that, the textbook would be 5 million pages long. So if I'm going to pare that down and shrink that down to a certain number of chapters, what material am I going to teach you? Well, that subjection, that subjective bias, that selection bias, that alone, that's going to vary from person to person. And there are people that would teach more of an old-fashioned, political military history, kind of great events, sort of dead white males, mountaintop to mountaintop. You might see in a more modern textbook only race, class, and gender, only history from the bottom up. So I'm going to give you actually kind of a variety there. This is a survey class, and I'm going to give you wide varieties of history there. It'll kind of help you think about things in different ways. So anyway, that's enough about Bloom's pyramid. I always want to be, cautious about any sort of abstraction or diagram like that also. In that case, it's a pyramid. Why not use a light bulb instead of a pyramid? Well, there's no particular basis unless you want to stress the fact that this foundation of knowledge is broad. You might do it for that reason. But same with political spectrums. Those of you, especially in History 1302, I'm going to be introducing you to the political spectrum. It's an abstraction, it's a diagram. What does it mean to be on the left or the right? Well, then you go on to Google Images and see the various political spectrums. You can see they're all different. There's ones that are two-dimensional. There's ones that are, one-dimensional. There's some that are two-dimensional. The things that people write on them are different. So these sorts of diagrams, I think, are useful as kind of a starting point, but you also want to be a little bit cautious about them and realize that they are just a starting point. They are just a diagram. This is another big thing I push in my teaching philosophy, if you'll pardon the idiom, is getting your ducks in a row. What I mean by that is use a calendar. I talk about this calendar a little bit over here in the fourth video, the toolkit video, where I talk about tips for success. I think learning how to use a calendar is very important, not just for your success as a student, potentially, but also just in general in the work world and various other things. But look ahead, look at the calendar here. This one's looking a little different than what you're going to be seeing for your section, but take a look at the due dates, see what assignments you have coming up. If you're in the O&L format, for instance, you're going to have an interpretive essay. You're going to have the social media analysis. Be on the lookout in social media for a history post. Be prepared, be thinking ahead of time. You get to choose your topics, and I want you to choose a topic that's interesting to you. And that may include something from chapters that are further on down the textbook we haven't gotten to yet. That's fine. Just let me know and I'll help you locate that spot in the textbook. Then you can start going out looking for outside sources, but just be thinking ahead. Another thing that you want to think ahead with a little bit is when you email me, is you don't need to be super formal. It doesn't need to be the King's English or anything like that, but you don't want something super casual either that you just fire off on your phone the way you would to a friend. I may have you rewrite that, not because I'm particularly uptight about it, but because I do believe in preparing you for the future. And I want you to get in practice so that you can send that email off to a potential client, or maybe your future boss, or maybe another professor or instructor that is a little bit more of a stickler for things like that. So if I shoot an email back at you and tell you to rewrite it, don't feel bad. I'm just doing that for your sort of good, so that you're prepared down the line. Now, another thing I'm going to do for your written work is I'm going to lay out a very clear rubric as to what you need to focus on. And these rubrics, they will match up exactly with what you have over in the description of the assignment. When you go over in Blackboard and you click on the written assignment and you look at the instructions, they are very thorough. Now, they're maybe a little longer than you might hope, but the upside of that is that they're very thorough and complete, and they will lay out exactly what you need to do. So people that take the time to read those instructions, they tend to do pretty well on the written portion of the course, and they tend to get pretty good grades on those, especially if they realize I also want you to clean it up. And when I say clean it up, I mean grammatically. If you look at the points here, we have a decent amount of points available for the writing and grammar component. And you might say, well, this isn't English class. The idea isn't just to write well for your English class. You're learning in your English class to write well in other circumstances. Here again, when you're communicating with a client, communicating with other people, colleagues on the job, it's not a big step to just go in and push the spell or grammar check button. If you don't know how to do it, I can show you how to do it. It's very quick and easy. It takes a total of maybe 2 minutes. I wish I could do that a little bit easier over in the History Hub chapters, but the software doesn't always work quite as well for stuff of that length. But for things the length of what you're going to be handing in, or you can usually set it up, so that your emails are checked also. And I know I make mistakes in emails all the time. I fire off dozens of them a day, and I'm glad I have Grammarly, in fact, set up to correct things. But not only are those things fairly easy to use, but you're sending the wrong message when you don't use them, especially if there's a bunch of different errors in there. All of us make, one or two. But the other thing you can do is you can read your written work out loud to yourself. That's a good way to proof your work. But anyway, so I set up rubrics for the written work, and you'll be able to see those. Now, what do we have here? I try to include a few things about my life, interesting things throughout some of these slideshows. I happen to work on this boat in a former life. This is the Northern Hawk, which is actually used to be a trawler, which was converted into a salmon processor. They take this out in the Bering Sea out of Dutch Harbor, Alaska, and buy fish from local fishermen and process it. And one of the jobs I used to do on this boat, other than working in the freezer, was I would grade salmon. In fact, I used to grade salmon long before I ever graded history essays. But we would break them down in king salmon into 1, 2, and 3. The 1 being a perfect specimen, one you could put whole on a plate at a fancy restaurant, all the way down to the 3, which often those were fish which were maybe on the edge of the net and they were nibbled away at by sharks or even a few walruses that far south. And those are the ones that get tossed over into the school lunches. But anyway, the reason I bring this up is that I was grading these, and I would oftentimes have a person on my left shoulder, with my company, and then wholesale buyers would come onto the boat and they're yelling at me over on the right shoulder, and they're yelling at each other, arguing over what the grading scale was. So I get pretty used to these arguments over grades, and kind of immune to them even before I arrived in teaching. But I grade, if you're 2 or 3 points below a cutoff line, I don't raise grades. You have to have cutoff lines somewhere. I grade fairly. As we saw in the previous slide with the written work, I have a very clear rubric, and I also give very thorough instructions. Another thing I do with the objective tests is I go in, and Blackboard has pretty good item analysis, and I'll go in and look and see how the crowd did. And any item for which a plurality did not get that correct, which is to say it was the most common answer, if it's not the most popular response, the correct response, then I will toss it out. And when I say toss it out, I don't mean that I go in and find everybody that missed it and gave them a point. I just give everyone a point. And that way, if you missed it, you get a point. And if you got it right, then you get 2 points. But I also take the C's down to 60%. I want you to pass. I realize we have a lot of different students from a lot of different backgrounds. A lot of you are working, returning students. We got younger students hopping up into college classes at early college start. We got people that are busy, other things going on in their life. I will find a way and work with you to get that passing grade. And this is another big part of my teaching philosophy, is I believe to the greatest extent possible in team teaching. Not only, using a librarian and bringing them into class in the face-to-face format, but also for the online format, encouraging you to use the online tutoring and the academic coaching. Some of the sections even have embedded online tutors and academic coaches, although it doesn't really matter one way or another whether they're embedded, because I know these people and they know me, they know my curriculum. So there are online tutors, in fact, that are specifically familiar with this curriculum. I encourage you to use them. You can form study groups on your own, but I don't really encourage that unless you've got some people in that group that really know how the course works and are doing well. Otherwise, what I would encourage is to come talk to me. Take advantage of me with virtual office hours. I like meeting with you. Type up your learning objectives so that we can look at them. Now, there is no extra credit in the course. Now, I don't believe in extra credit anyway. There is no such thing as extra credit in the work world. There is no extra credit in upper division college courses, at least not that I've ever seen before. I do encourage you to put extra effort into regular credit if you happen to have some extra time on your hands. But my experience has been that when extra credit is offered, a lot of people just go try to do something that instead of doing the regular work, because maybe they don't like, the written format or something, and they want to go watch a movie or something. We are going to use some legacy formats here, reading and writing, I believe are probably connected to critical thinking quintessentially or intrinsically connected to critical thinking. I don't know that for a fact. I'm sort of agnostic on it as it stands, but There are people who want to get away from the written word as an educational tool. I'm not one of those people. So there is no extra credit, but regardless of what I think about extra credit, it is strictly forbidden within our department, within the history department at Austin Community College anyway, so I don't use it. I also do not do retesting. I'm not interested in, what your score on a test is the 5th time you take it. What I'm interested in is you doing the work, putting in the preparation, and how well you do it the first time you take it. There again, much better analogy to either upper division courses or work. Now, speaking of work, I am very big into encouraging you to spread work out. I do not want your work clumped up. I don't want you cramming right before the test. This is, if work was butter, I don't want it all coming at once. For one thing, studies have shown that people do not remember much of what they've learned when they cram for tests. The retention is not nearly as good in terms of what you walk away from the course with. That's just a bad way to do it anyway. Now, these challenges, I'm going to talk a little bit more about calendars over in the 4th video for those of you that want to see it, the toolkit. But deadlines, I believe in having deadlines. I think that once in a while I can be a little bit flexible within the semester, but I'm not flexible about finishing all the work by the end of the semester. You have to close, you have to finish. The challenge of doing that varies quite a bit depending on whether you're in the 5.5-week course, which is the very shortest. There you have to understand, I'm in an intensive course. I need to work a few hours every day. And if I fall behind, there's no hope of catching up. On the other extreme, we have the 16-week course. There, it's a different challenge where it's much more spread out. Life events happen that intervene, but you need to learn how to get this work done. The work that you're going to be doing in a few years, it could be more casual than academics. It could be less casual than you could be, for instance, in the military or a first responder or working in an ICU unit, and lives may depend on you showing up for work and understanding that you got to hit that deadline. If you're working as a musician in Austin and you miss a gig, you're never going to work again. The word is going to get out. People need you to be there. Other people are depending on you being there. And that's what most of you are going to be in a situation, not as dramatic as working, in an emergency room, or as casual as not having any deadlines. You'll probably be working at a business where if you miss deadlines, you're going to cost the company money. People do not like that for good reason. So I'm going to encourage you to spread your work out, be thinking about it ahead of time, spread that butter around the toast. If there's one image that sticks in your head as a mnemonic device at the end of this video that I want you to walk away with, be thinking about this butter spread out evenly. All right, I want to wind down here today by just telling a brief story about a guy I grew up following as a kid, growing up in the Midwest. I used to be a big Minnesota Vikings fan, and one of their star players was a defensive tackle, Alan Page, first defensive player to ever win MVP in the NFL. And my buddies and I would usually stop at the Shell station on the way home from school and grab a little pack of football cards and get the stale cardboard tasting bubble gum out of there and put that in our mouths. But oftentimes we look on the back of the cards, there'd be a little cartoon, and it would describe what this player did in the off season. Now, today that wouldn't make sense because they make enough money, they don't need to work in the off season, and they usually work year round. But back then they would work from August to December, and most of them didn't get paid enough money to, live just on playing football. And so they would work other jobs. Alan Page did make enough money that he didn't have to work another job. So what he would do is always in the spring semester, he would take law classes at the University of Minnesota. So year after year, he did this. And this takes a long time to get through law school, even if you're going through full time. He's just going part-time. But spring semester, then football in the fall, spring semester, on and on he went. Till finally, by the time he finally retired from playing football, he had a law degree. He then took that law degree, started practicing, then became a judge, worked his way all the way up and became an associate judge on the Supreme Court of the state of Minnesota. So here he is, in fact, getting awarded the Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor from President Trump. You can see this guy right here in the bottom left is the same guy who was throwing the pass in the previous slide, which is Roger the Dodger Staubach of the Dallas Cowboys. But the reason I bring this up, it may seem a little irrelevant, and I apologize for those of you that aren't football fans, but the reason I bring it up is that I know many of you have a lot on your plate. And you're working, some of you are working time and a half, some of you are working 2 jobs, you're trying to go to college and better your station. You're taking care of loved ones, you're raising kids, you're doing a lot. I appreciate that, and I want to applaud you on that effort. I'll also say that if you do get to a point where you feel like maybe you have a little bit too much on your plate, don't hesitate to withdraw from the class. But if you do that, you want to keep an eye on how that may impact your financial aid, and also keep an eye on the fact that you can really only do that up to 3 times as you're working on a 2-year degree, and then up to 6 times while you're working on a 4-year degree. And the reason the legislature has it like that is that the population of Texas, Central Texas especially, is growing a little bit faster than the capped enrollment at area colleges. And so they're kind of trying to move people through the pipeline like that. But anyway, that's just a little piece on Alan Page and connecting to the fact that, you know, it may seem like this is sort of a big mountain in front of you, but if you just keep working away, keep chipping away at it consistently, then next thing you know, you've met your goals. Now, what are we looking at here? My wife and I, we're big fans of Whippets. These are 2 of our older Whippets here. And I wanted to mention a couple things that I do in History Hub that maybe you should not do in your own writing. In other words, they kind of fall under the category of do as I say, not as I do. But one of them is you should never use idioms. Idiom is like an old phrase. Like a few slides ago, I told you to get your ducks in a row. I'll use idioms like that in History Hub. And the reason I do is just that I know you're going to be hearing them anyway when you're out and about and you're following the news. And so I want you to know what the idiom means. Plus, sometimes it's a better way to explain it. So, but I think your English teacher, it's safe to say, will very likely tell you never use idioms. Likewise, your English teacher should tell you in good writing, never use a word that's fancier than the one you could use. If you could use the simpler word, use it. Same reason I don't do that is just because I'm teaching you something. And that's part of going to college, is getting smarter. You may encounter that word later in another class, and so I want to teach you that word. So I'll use the slightly fancier word and then basically kind of, connect you over to a link or something like that. So that, if in case you don't know, you can look at the Webster's Dictionary. A good example of that would be, for instance, if you looked at these 2 puppies here, and I told you one of them was named Tate and one of them was named Luna, I could say my wife and I, we decided when we got a 3rd Whippet that we were going to use a portmanteau and name her Tuna. Well, I could just use the word combo, but that wouldn't be quite as fun. I get to teach you another word here. So anyway, that's a little bit on teaching philosophy. I will close by saying that you probably didn't hear what I just said on the last 2 slides. And that's because what we're seeing visually is oftentimes more important than what we're hearing in terms of audio. And these puppies are so cute that I could see why maybe you weren't paying attention to what I was saying. There's a funny story connected to that. Richard Nixon was running for the vice presidential ticket with Dwight Eisenhower in 1952. And he was accused, well, he did take some illegal campaign donations, and he got caught and everything like that. One of those donations, along with thousands of dollars, happened to be a little puppy named Checkers. How did he deal with that? He just took the offensive, went on TV with Checkers and was petting Checkers as he apologized for all the crimes he committed. Well, it turns out his approval ratings went up for that very reason. So that's about it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here that I want to point out for you. One of the things you're going to see on the very front page of History Hub, here, I'll stop the share here. But one of the things, I'm back in time, by the way, it's December 28th, 1975. I've just witnessed my beloved Vikings losing that game to the Dallas Cowboys. In fact, Roger Staubach, the quarterback you saw, he threw a 50-yard pass on the last play of the game that became known as a Hail Mary pass. And then that phrase caught along. Anyway, it's freezing here. Hoping the Vikings maybe in the future will move indoors. But one of the things you'll see on the very front of the History Hub, where it talks about my teaching philosophy, is that, like journalism, we look a little bit not just at who, what, when, where, and why, but for us, the very most important of those 5 W's is going to be the why. And that's when we're going to move our way up through the Bloom's Pyramid a little bit. So I hope that brief introduction to my teaching philosophy helped explain how the course works. And I hope you're having a good day, and I'm going to go get inside and get warm. Thanks. Bye.